Hello, friends. I miss you. I really do. We had an elders meeting last night. So Joni White, Chris Roberts, Jeff Sargent, and I want to give you an update from that meeting. A couple of things that we kicked around. We certainly recognize that we're feeling the burn, longing to be together, and also watching what's going on with COVID in Tillamook County, and we ultimately came to the consensus that we need to hold off a week or two more and watch what's going on before we regather. So there's an update on that. But the more important update I want to share is this idea that we kicked around about well, you remember when you had a pen pal? um, Here's the idea that we kicked around. What if the people who opted in, what if we paired you up with someone else in the church family just for a month, and you knew that you were going to try to connect with that person throughout the month in a variety of ways? It could be phone calls, texts, letters, social media, a safe get together. And of course, we'd give you some ideas, lighthearted and interesting. Maybe some of them deep, but you wouldn't have to go there. Just whatever you want to do, just to stay connected to one another. So maybe even send them a picture of your breakfast, something you ate this week. Some of them just small things, but ways of just staying connected. So I'm going to be sending a letter about this, and if you're interested, then I'll have some kind of a response. Hey, give me an opt-in so that we know you would like to be a part of this, and see how it goes. So there's that. All right, our parable for today. Mine. How old were you, or can you remember when you first started saying that word? I think of a 2-year-old. Uh, 2-year-olds are already using that word in an important way. That's my toy. They may not know how to say all of that, but it's mine. And they might not use the word possession or ownership, but they know what that stuff feels like, because it feels like, hey, mine. And ownership is a fascinating phenomenon. It really is, because we start out by defining objects. We say, that's my toy, that's my backpack, that's my jacket, that's my house, that's my car. But before you know it, we aren't defining the objects. The objects are also defining us. We build this strong relationship and attachment to these things that we own. So, for instance, I just walked across the street and up into the church building to record here, and I look at my Dodge Dakota pickup sitting there in the driveway, and it's sunny out, and it's looking pretty good today, that pickup. And I look at it, and I feel a little bit better about myself. uh, and and then I I think about some of the junkier, more beater type vehicles that I've owned in my life, and times when I looked at them and I didn't feel as good about myself. Uh, have you ever experienced this in any way? Advertisers know that this is a thing. They don't just try to sell us a product. They try to sell us an identity, because they know the way this works. It's our possessions. We become attached to them because they say something about who we are. And they say something about who we want to be in the world, how we want other people to see us. They become an extension of our sense of self. And we get this all tied up with possessions. And it's not just physical objects, it's anything that we call mine. So it could be that's my team, that's my crew, that's my country, that's my job. And it all affects that's my identity, mine. And underneath it all, who am I? Well, it brings us to our Bible story today, which is a story of people clinging to possessions, clinging to ownership. Some of the people in our story had lost nearly all ownership, nearly all sense of ownership in their world, trying to survive, trying to scrape by. And I can imagine this sense of losing their identity as this happened. And then there are others in our story who they were sitting on top of a whole big pile of possessions. And so they didn't really want to make any changes. They wanted to maintain the status quo. So here's our story. Jerusalem was packed. It was Passover, which meant that the city is flooded with religious pilgrims coming from near and from far. Like from Jerusalem went from 50,000 people to 180,000 people, like over triple the number of people in town. And so it became very loud and busy, and people and animals for all of the sacrifices. And so it just turned into this zoo, and it all centered in the temple. 35 acres, roughly 9 football fields with these limestone walls plated in gold. There were a lot of people who called the temple mine. And there were big signs warning foreigners of the death penalty if they enter, and signs saying men only in this area. No matter that Isaiah said this temple is supposed to be a house of prayer for the nations, mine. So the temple, this religious institution that employed thousands, the central bank of Jerusalem, the place where the record of every single debt was kept, the temple treasury was loaded. 12 different temple tax systems in place, all adding up to a tax of 23%, all going into the treasury. And while we don't know the exact balance of the temple bank account, we know that there was a guy who broke into the temple and stole from the treasury the equivalent of what would be roughly $20 million today. And he did not come close to depleting the temple treasury. So there's that. Kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about. So business was booming for the temple. I get the image of a state fair for some reason. Every animal had to pass inspection. Every animal had to be ritually clean. And so what happens if you bring an animal that you're going to sacrifice and then you find out it doesn't pass inspection? Well, you're going to have to buy an animal from one of the merchants at the temple. And of course, the inspectors and the merchants, they're in cahoots with one another. But they'll sell you an animal. And if you need oil or wine or flour for a sin offering or a purity offering, any kind of offering, they'll sell you that, all for an exorbitant markup. Cha-ching, cha-ching. And of course, if you're going to the temple and you haven't paid your temple tax, then you're going to have to do that as well. And the only kind of coin that is accepted is the silver didrachma. But what if you don't have that kind of coin? Well, it's fine. No worries. Whatever kind of coin you have, or maybe something else of value, you could bring it to the money changer and they'd change it out for you so that you could get your silver coins. But there's a charge. The charge was about 2 hours worth, the equivalent about 2 hours worth of labor. So, cha-ching, cha-ching. So you've got people in the temple carrying merchandise everywhere. You see why it sounds like a state fair? Like business is booming. And who's at the helm of it all? The leaders of Israel, the chief priests, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law. They're at the helm of this. The chief priests are within the wealthy aristocracy of the land, the elites sitting on top of this loaded treasury. Why wouldn't they want to, just kind of maintain status quo? If you have the control and the leadership of your people, even if the Roman Empire is over you, if you're sitting where you are and you're benefiting from exploiting folks, then like, why make too many waves? Now, what if you couldn't afford the state fair? What if you were someone who you're like, I can't pay the temple tax? Well, you're labeled the Am Haaretz. We've talked about this before. You are the people of the land. You are no longer God's people. You're no better than foreigners or pagans or second-class citizens, and you're locked out from the worshiping community. And those folks, they were really hurting between the Roman taxes and the temple taxes, and then if they had a few unfortunate events, a poor harvest or something, they're indebted to the rich elites who give them a loan, but then the loan is foreclosed on, and so then a rich elite landowner somewhere takes what little they have left. They lose their home, their land. These folks get turned into sharecroppers. They get turned into day laborers. And so now they're living in a world where more and more they feel like, I don't own anything. I don't have possession of anything. When Jesus came to Jerusalem, it made sense that these folks, the Amharetz, and plenty of folks in a similar position, rallied around Jesus, and they're waving their patriotic palm branches. We think of this as Palm Sunday. They're singing their version of the Star Spangled Banner, which was Psalm 118. And remember that reference because it's going to be very important later. So it's Hosanna, Hosanna, save us, we pray. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And it's a song, it's a verse that harkens back to their last experience of a political national revolution. It was their last experience of ownership, reclaiming our land. This is our land, and their government and their power, mine. And so Jesus comes into Jerusalem, and it's Jesus. We want to be owners again. Psalm 118, and their Star Spangled Banner song made Jesus cry, and it wasn't because he liked the song. It was because he knew they didn't understand, and he's weeping and saying, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if only you knew the things that would make for peace." That same day, Jesus walks into Jerusalem and he shuts down the temple, shuts down the state fair, takes control of the entire 35 acres, this whole building, this whole facility for at least a few hours, runs the money changers, the animal inspectors, the merchants, the livestock, everyone who's carrying merchandise, runs them all out of there. And he calls the temple. He says, you guys have made this into a den of robbers. And he quotes Isaiah. This is supposed to be a house of prayer for the nations. So it must have set the leaders of Israel on edge. It must have. Because it wasn't just this event. Over and over, Jesus had made these scathing critiques of the leaders of Israel. publicly he had made them. He said, you guys are gobbling up widows' homes, and you guys are a brood of vipers, and you're not lifting a finger to ease people's burdens. And you're creating all these loopholes that benefit you, and you're neglecting justice. And meanwhile, the people of the land, they're claiming that Jesus is a prophet. They're singing their Star Spangled Banner songs, and they're doing their patriotic thing. They're calling for a revolution against the Roman Empire. And so to the leaders of Israel, uh, this all seemed very dangerous. Like a revolution was dangerous to them because unless a revolution actually succeeded, which was unlikely, it was only going to make things much worse for them. Israel would be crushed again in a new way, a different way, a worse way. And so to them, better to maintain the status quo, especially if they're the ones who are benefiting from exploiting the people. And so the chief priests, the teachers of the law, the Pharisees, they were afraid of these crowds and afraid of losing control and what might happen, afraid of losing identity. Mine. Well, the next day, Jesus shows up in town again. He shut down the temple yesterday, and now he's back in their crowded temple, and everyone's standing around, and the leaders of Israel, they're starting to freak out. Is Jesus going to try to shut the temple down again today? And so in front of everyone, they ask Jesus, by whose authority are you doing this? It's a question of ownership. Like, whose house is this? And Jesus dodged their question, and instead he told them a parable. He told them a story. And this parable captures, in a way, it captures where everyone was coming from, but something that they were all missing. It's the kind of story that you start out hearing it, especially for the first audience, I think. You start out hearing it one way, but then as it goes on, the story begins to sound another way. So here's the story Jesus tells. He says, there was this landowner, and the landowner planted a vineyard. And he put a wall around the vineyard. He dug a pit for a wine press. He built a watchtower. He rented the vineyard to some farmers, some tenants, and he moved to another place for a long time. And at harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect his fruit. It's a sharecropper situation. Now, the leaders of Israel, they were used to ownership. They were used to having control and leadership and aristocracy, so it's really not hard for them to imagine this story and identify with the landowner, collecting rent, temple taxes from tenants. And of course, there were others in the temple who they probably heard this story from a completely different angle. They didn't hear this story as a story of ownership. They heard this story as a story of loss. This is the story of a poor peasant farmer whose loans have just been foreclosed upon, and they've lost their land, and now they're turned into sharecroppers, tenants, renters. And so they hear this story as, oh man, it just became a lot harder for you because your farm ground just got turned into a vineyard. And anytime that you plant a vineyard, it doesn't give you fruit right away. It's going to take 4 years, 5 years before you get any kind of fruit from that vineyard. And so that's 4 to 5 years of like little to no income. But these vines need to be tended. And so what other options do you have? For some people, they may say, I don't know what other options I have. Maybe you can get away with planting a few vegetables between the vines, even though the law says you're not supposed to. Some people probably heard this story from Jesus as, man, that's rough. So Jesus continues his story. He says, at harvest time, which is like year 4 or 5 or something, the landowner sent a servant to the tenants to collect some fruit. It's the sharecropper's contract. So the tenants, they seize that servant that the landowner sent, and they beat him and they send him away empty-handed. And so the landowner, he sent another servant and another servant. They beat one, they wound one, they kill another, stone another, shamefully treat another one. They send them all away empty-handed. Now, every poor person who's standing in the temple and listening to Jesus, every person who's been singing yesterday they were singing the Star Spangled Banner to Jesus, Psalm 118, as Jesus tells this story, they can really feel the burn. Like when you lose all sense of ownership and you are pushed to the breaking point, eventually you get to this place where you say, you know what? No more. It's time to take back what belongs to us. Violence, force, revolution. And so certainly they can feel it. The law actually said that for folks like the folks in Jesus' story, if someone like a sharecropper, a tenant, can take three harvests, just three harvests from this piece of ground, legally it becomes theirs. So what they need to do is fend off the landowner for 3 years. Don't pay him. Take a full harvest and don't pay him his share of any of it for 3 whole years. Now, the leaders of Israel, they're listening to the story too, and they know, they're like, that the possibility of that actually working in our world, the possibility of the tenants fending off the landowner for 3 years, that's about as far-fetched as Israel thinking they're ready to defeat the entire Roman Empire. In a story like this, everyone knows that the landowners have all of the power. They have the legal power, the social, political, military power. They got all the power. Uh, and there were stories from the time of landowners who hired squads of assassins to go and deal with tenants like the tenants in this story. So what these tenants are doing is just futile. So Jesus continues his story. He says, well, the owner of the vineyard, he said, what am I going to do? I'm going to send my son. I'm going to send my son whom I love. They'll respect my son. You see, like a slave couldn't be a legal representative, but a son could. So I sends him. And when the tenants see the son, they talk the matter over, and they say to one another, "This guy, he's the heir. Uh, he's gonna inherit this whole place. Let's kill him, and then the inheritance will be ours." And so they killed the son. They took his body, they threw it out of the vineyard, they left it to rot. Now I can just see Jesus letting those words fall and letting those words just sit with the people. I can see the leaders of Israel grimacing. They're thinking about their own beloved sons. And man, this story just took kind of a nasty turn, a tragic turn. And they're thinking, man, is collecting a sharecrop rent of any value, is it worth the life of my own son? Much less collecting a sharecrop rent on a vineyard where this is like the first harvest out of the gate. It's not going to be a real strong harvest. And when you haven't seen a single piece of fruit and your son is murdered, do you say to yourself, was that worth it? And so I can see the leaders of Israel, as they're listening, they're rethinking, maybe I don't want to identify with the landowner in this story. But it's not any better to identify with the tenants, because the tenants, they have it coming now. Man, what a terrible, tragic story. So much bloodshed. And somewhere in there, I can see it dawning on them. Wait a minute, Jesus. We've heard this story before. We know what you're doing. You're retelling Isaiah's story, aren't you? It's Isaiah 5. I will sing for the one I love, a song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared it of stones and planted it with the choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it and cut out a winepress as well. Then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. Now, you dwellers in Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done for my vineyard than I've done for it? When I look for good grapes, why did it yield only bad? Now I'll tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. I will take away its hedge and it'll be destroyed. I'll break down its wall and it'll be trampled, and I'll make it a wasteland, neither pruned nor cultivated, and briars and thorns will grow there. I'll command the clouds not to rain on it. The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. He looked for justice, but saw bloodshed. He looked for righteousness, but heard cries of distress. Woe to you who add house to house and join field to field until no space is left, and you live alone in the land. In a flash, the leaders of Israel heard Jesus' story differently. Oh, it's Isaiah's story reworked, they realize. It's Isaiah's story. But in Isaiah's story, the vineyard doesn't produce a good crop. But in Jesus' version of the story, there's a perfectly good crop that is available, but none of it is making it to the owner. None of it is making it to the owner's children, the owner's family. And it isn't the fault of the vineyard. It is the fault of the tenants. And light bulb, the leaders of Israel realize, oh, Jesus is calling us the tenants in the story. We aren't the landlord in the story. We're the tenants. And here they stand. They are in the middle of their gold-plated temple with a treasury full of millions, trying to maintain the status quo, trying to keep ownership while the land is filled with distress and bloodshed, and adding house to house and field to field, and gobbling up widows' homes until there's no space left, and they live alone in the land. Mine. They know that the parable is about them. Jesus is telling them the problem is not with the people of Israel. The problem is with you as leaders. They are the renters who've started acting like owners. And so Jesus turns to the people who yesterday were singing their Star-Spangled Banner song, Psalm 118, their Revolution song, and he puts them on the spot there in the temple. He says, when the vineyard owner, the Lord of the vineyard, when he comes, what is he going to do to those tenants after they kill his son? And I can see them just hanging their heads. They don't want to answer, but they know the answer. They say, and in our world, that Lord of the vineyard is going to bring those wretches to a wretched end. He's going to rent that vineyard out to other tenants who will give him his share of the crop at harvest time. Now, in some versions, because it shows up in 3 different Gospels, plus the Gospel of Thomas. In some versions of the story, Jesus offers them this answer, like they don't even want to say it. But I can just see them hanging their heads. Like, this story had their hopes high for ownership of the vineyard, and it ends in such a grisly way. They say, God forbid. And Jesus looks directly at all of them, and he asks this question. Including the Bible experts within the leaders of Israel, he says, have you guys not read in the scripture, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone? The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. They all knew. They all knew. Jesus just quoted Psalm 118, verse 22. Remember back at the beginning? Psalm 118, it's the Star-Spangled Banner verse. And Jesus just quoted to them the verse that comes directly before their Star-Spangled Banner verse. So they sing him the Star-Spangled Banner yesterday. He clears the temple. They say, by whose authority are you doing this? Whose house is this? And he's quoting them their own scripture. Here they are. They are all striving for ownership of the vineyard. Some of them want to overthrow the Roman Empire. Some of them want to maintain status quo because they're already sitting on top of this pile of exploited wealth. And Jesus is using that same scripture that they're using to tell them, you guys are completely missing something. The stone the builders rejected becomes the cornerstone. You know, it's really hard to face it. It's really hard to admit when the idea that you rejected, the piece that you threw in the garbage bin, ends up being the linchpin. When it ends up being the key to the entire puzzle, that's hard to admit. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. They thought they had it all figured out, and they completely missed something. They want to be owners so badly, but what if? What if they are not meant to be owners? Can they see it? Could they see it in stark relief at all? Like, what happens when renters start acting like owners? It's the lose-lose of trying to fix your problems with violence and the lose-lose of greed. Israel is the vineyard, and God is the owner. And what belongs to the owner is not making it to the owner or to the owner's family, the owner's children. Instead, it's making it into their pocketbooks, their treasury, violence, injustice. And God has been sending these messengers, and they've been killing them and mistreating them. And now standing in front of them is the Son, the stone that they are rejecting. And it's not enough to steal the crop if the Son shows up. And so the leaders of Israel are plotting to murder the Son. And the judgment of God is coming. And so Jesus says to them, I tell you, the kingdom of God is going to be taken away from you. It's going to be given to a people who will produce its fruit. God was not replacing Israel. There are some bad readings of this parable that produce like this anti-Semitism thing where it's Israel replaced. God wasn't replacing Israel. God was replacing the leaders of Israel. So it's not Israel replaced, it's Israel expanded. The leaders of the people of Israel, they knew that this parable was about them, but they couldn't do anything to Jesus because they're afraid of the crowds. The crowds want a revolution. Jesus is a prophet to them, and so, irony of ironies, they do exactly what the parable kind of predicts. They go away and they start looking for a way to arrest Jesus. And that's the parable for today. We live in a world that is constantly trying to train us to become consumers. Ownership, mine. We don't want to be renters. Who wants to be a renter? We want to be owners. U.S. citizens have more stuff than any people, any society in history. Science writer Tim DeChant has shown that if everyone on the planet had as much stuff as the average U.S. citizen, so they're eating the same food, buying the same amount of stuff, producing the same amount of garbage, all that. If that was the case, we would need 3.9 planet Earths just to sustain that level of consumption. Ownership. We get this dopamine hit when we own something, when we call it ours, and we get attached to our possessions, and they define us, and they become our identity. Mine, mine, mine. Accumulation of stuff and things. And once we start treating objects as an owner, does it change the way that we interact with the needs and the claims of others? Does it become okay for our treasury to be full, status quo, keep the status quo, while there are other people in the land who are suffering? This is my vineyard, my treasury, mine, my precious. What happens when renters, tenants, stewards forget that they are renters and they start thinking like owners? How do we respond to God's claim on this world that we are stewards of? That's Genesis. That's the very beginning. We are stewards. Jesus told the leaders of Israel, he said, the kingdom of God is going to be given to others. It's going to be given to people who will produce its fruit. Well, what did he mean? Fast forward a few years. The book of Acts tells us all of the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. There's only one thing left to do. You could call it a thought experiment for the week. Just see what comes of it. As you walk through your home, as you walk through your vineyard, your land this week, hold this question in your mind. It's, as you look around, what if this is not mine? What if all of this belongs to God? And what if I am only a steward of this? You know, God comes to us in a million different ways. Life is full of messages from God, calling for our involvement, our compassion, our generosity, our stewardship, our faith, fruit. And rather than sending those messages away, leave me alone. This is mine. This life is mine. What if you simply stay open, and as those messages come, you're saying, what if this isn't mine? What if all of this belongs to God? And simply see what happens inside of you. See how you feel called to live. Love you, friends.